Hi everyone, welcome back to SQL Guide. Today we'll discuss basic concept on SQL Server Constraint. If you are a fresher DBA and looking for any change, you should know SQL Server Constraint. What is a SQL Server Constraint? Type of SQL Server Constraint and difference check constraint and foreign key, difference primary key constraint and unique key constraint. What is SQL Server Constraint? Constraints are used to limit the type of data that can enter into a table. Constraints in a SQL Server are a predefined rule that you can enforce on a single or a multiple columns. These constraints help maintain the integrity, reliability, and accuracy of a value stored in this column. If there is any violation between the constraint and the data action, the action is abort. Constraint can be column level or a table level. Column level constraint applied to a column and table level constraint applied to the whole table. You can create a constraint using create table or alter table statements. What are constraints in SQL? What are type of SQL Server constraint? Not null, unique, check, primary key, foreign key, and default constraint. What is not null constraint in SQL? Make sure that column cannot have a null value. It prevents null value from entering the column. You can say that the not null constraint enforces a column to not accept null value. By default, SQL Server allows storing null value in a column. What is unique constraint in SQL? Make sure that all values in a column are different. Make sure that unique values are inserted into the column. The unique constraint in SQL Server ensures that you do not have a duplicate value in a single column or combination of columns. SQL Server automatically creates an index when unique constraints are defined. You can have only one unique value in the column, including null. What is check constraint in SQL Server? Make sure that value in a column satisfy a specific condition. You can say that check constraint enforce domain integrity by limiting the values that are accepted by one or more column. What is foreign key constraint? Prevent action that would destroy a link between tables. Maintain the referential integrity for a record in another table. A relationship must be created between two tables by referencing foreign key with primary key of another table. A table that contains foreign key constraint is called the child table. You can also say that a foreign key is a column or a set of a column that allow us to establish a referential link between the data in a two tables. The table with the foreign key is called the child table and the table with the primary key is called the reference or parent table. Difference between check constraint and foreign key. Foreign key constraint obtain the list of valid value from another table, while check constraint valid value from a logical expression. Check constraint enforce domain integrity. Foreign key is a referential integrity. Primary key constraint. What is primary key constraint? A combination of a not null and a unique. Uniquely identify each row in a table. You can also say that a primary key is a column or a group of a column that uniquely identify each row in a table. A table can contain only one primary key constraint. A primary key cannot exceed 16 columns and a total key length of 900 bytes. Difference between primary key and unique key constraint. Primary key used to identify each record in the table. Unique key prevent storing duplicate entry in a column for a null value. Primary key, only one primary key allowed in one table. A table can have more than one primary key. The primary key by default create a cluster index. The unique key by default create non-cluster index. B cannot store null value in the primary key column. B can store null value in the unique key column, but only one null is allowed. Primary key enforce entity integrity. Unique key enforce unique data. Default constraint. What is default constraint? Set a default value for a column if no value is specified. If no value has been assigned to the field, make sure that a value will be assigned by default. You can say also the default constraint insert a default value into a column if any insert a new row into the table without specifying the value for the column. Let's connect with SQL Server Management Studio to show you how to use default constraint, primary key constraint, check constraint, not null constraint. Default constraint. I am creating the table book detail with default value for the column book number, and this is the default value. So create table book details with column book ID, book name, pub date and book number. Default, this is the value, and author ID. Let's create the table created. Now let's insert the data into book details table. Let pass book ID, okay, column book name, pub date, author ID, but I am not passing for book number because I assigned a default value here and this is the default value. Let's insert the data into book details. You can see data inserted. Let's select the data. You can see here book ID 1, book name SQL guide, pub date, published date is 2019-9-2 and book number which is default value which is taken from here. and author ID this is. So this is the way to define the default value, and you can also, if table is already exists, table is already available, you can alter the table and add the default constraint. For example, in book table you can see here pub date. I am going to pub date going to assign a default value. So this is the command: alter a table, book details, add a constraint, constraint name, default, get date for pub date. Let's run it. You can see it's completed. Now I am going to insert the data, but in the place of pub date I am not going to pass. So I am going to remove this because I assigned a default value here. Now let's insert a data here. You can change here to. Now let's insert a data. You can see data inserted. Now select the data. You can see here pub date has taken a default date, which is get date, and this is the today date. So this is the way to define a default constraint for new table, and if the table is already available, you can alter the table and add the constraint default. Next, not null constraint. I am creating a new table, a student, with column ID, last name and first name. This both three column I defined as not null constraint. It means value is required for this three column. Age int, it is default null only. Let insert data into the table. First create the table. I have created table. Let's insert the data into the table as student, ID, last name, first name and age. Guide and age I am passing 18. Let's insert. You can see one record already inserted. Suppose ID, last name, first name I defined as a not null and value is required. So one of the column I am removing to insert. Let's now insert. You can see insert fail because I defined first name as a not null and value is required. So that insert failed. Let's see the column age int. You can see default is null. So I am going to insert data into the table as student, ID, last name, first name, and I am going to remove the age column. And I want to see how it work. Let insert. You can see insert got successfully because age I defined as default null value. Let's select the data. You can see here age column data inserted as null value. Now I want age to be not null constant. This means value is required for age column. If table is already available, you can use this command to add not null consent. Alter a table as student, alter a column age, int not null. Once you be alter this column as a not null, then value is required for this column. You cannot insert null value. So let's run this, but I already inserted null value. So if I am going to change not null, first you have to drop and you have to remove the null value from the age column, or you have to update the age column to some other value. Let's run and see. You can see insert failed. So what I am going to do, I am going to remove this null and this value I am going to remove it. So let's delete from student where id equal to 2. You can see data deleted, and you can see here data already deleted. Now if you going to alter this command, it will get successful. You can see this command get successfully. So if you are going to insert once again without age column, it will get insert will get failed. So you need to give here column age, and I am giving age here 23. Let's insert. You can see data will get insert. Now select the data from the table. You can see data got inserted. So this is the way you can define the not null constraint when you creating the table. And if table is already available, you can alter the table, alter the column, and define the not null consent.
Next, check constant. How to define the check constant? I am going to create a table person with ID, last name, first name, and age with check constant age greater than and equal to 18. Here it means if you are going to insert less than 18 age, that insert will get failed for the table person. Let's create a table created. Now let's insert the data into the table. So insert into person ID, last name, first name, and age. ID1, last name SQL, first name SQL, last name, first name guide, and age 23. But you have to note here, I have defined if age is greater than 18, only insert will get success. Let's run it. You can see insert get success. Now I am going to define here age 10. Let's run this. You can see here insert got failed here. Because I am given here greater than 18, you can insert age here. But it is below 18, so insert got failed. So insert got failed. Now once again I am going to give here 25. Age greater than equal to 18, here check constraint I am using, so it will get successful. Yeah, insert got successful. So this is the way you can pass a check constraint when you creating a new table, and if table is already available, you can alter this table and add the check constraint on this column age.
Next, unique constraint. How to define unique constraint when you're creating the table? This is the example. I am creating a table transaction history archive 6 and transaction ID int not null constraint name unique transaction ID. So when you creating any new table, you can define constraint using this command constraint name unique and column name in which you are creating the constraint. I am creating the constraint on transaction ID. Let's create, and if table already created and table already available and you want to add a constraint for a table, you can use this command. For example, for the table person and a password, I am adding constraint unique for this column. Alter a table name, add a constraint name unique and column name where unique constraint added. So this is the command to add a constraint if the table already available on the database, and this is the command if you are creating a new table to add a unique constraint for that column transaction ID. Next, primary key. So this is the command to create a primary key when you are creating that table. I am creating primary key on a column transaction ID. So command constraint name primary key cluster and column transaction ID. This content are getting longer, so I will explain primary key and foreign key constraint, how to create a primary key and how to create a foreign key on a table. I will create a separate content for this. Thanks for watching SQL guide. Please share, subscribe and like my channel.